a cruel disease that in the United States targeted the most marginalized populations: IV drug users, gay men, the poor, sex workers. During 1981 came the first reports of a new gay cancer. First, the story ran in a small queer paper in New York City. Then, a few months later, in an obscure section of the New York Times. It was entitled "Rare Cancer Seen in 41 Homosexuals." The article was penned by Lawrence K. Alp. Gay men were dying of an unusual disease. They presented with purple spots on their skin, and their lymph nodes eventually became swollen before they died. It seemed to be a cancer, but the symptoms matched a type usually seen in only very old people. The people who were dying at the time, however, were young and relatively healthy. Doctors did not understand what was happening or whether the cancer was contagious. That's from the New York Times, July 3rd, 1981, page 20. These news stories were personal to me. You see, I turned 18 in 1981. I literally was leaving the farm just a few miles south of here and going to a large university far from home. In retrospect, my chances of survival were not that good. Yet today I can say, after 40 devastating years, I am alive. I can scream it, I am alive. I am alive by luck. I am alive by the grace of God, or by chance. Unlike the 700,000 fellow Americans who perished, we buried so many. I spent 40 years watching. I watched people stigmatized, demonized, and blame people with AIDS. I watched the government do nothing. I watched most of the religious community become jubilant because we were finally getting what we deserved. And I watched my friends die horrible, early deaths. The deaths were heart-wrenching. One Christmas Eve, I was singing at Grace Episcopal for a packed candlelit service. And as the procession went down the aisle, I noticed my husband standing next to a wizened, frail man who looked like he was in his 80s. As the choristers passed, they gently touched this man. This puzzled me. When I got closer in the procession, I realized it was my friend Paul. Paul was a much-loved and talented singer in the choir. He died a few months after that Christmas. He was 44. My mother desperately feared for my health. She found some solace one summer Sunday as we sat listening to a priest at Grace Episcopal preach about her experiences in New York during the 80s. The priest had gone to seminary in the city and had been a hospital chaplain. She started her sermon by reading the parable of the Good Samaritan and described what was going on around her in New York at the time. So many young men were dying that the hospital wards were being added in increasing numbers. People were coming from all over the country to see their sick children. Because she was older and thought to be more maternal, this priest helped the confused parents who not only needed to hear that their children were sick, but they were dying. Some families disowned, shunned, and refused to help. So it was the neighbors, coworkers, friends who stepped in to ease the suffering. The reality became even more personal and poignant for this priest as one of her classmates became sick. She and the other seminarians cared for him until he died. She ended her sermon rhetorically asking the question that is posed by Jesus in this famous parable: who is the good neighbor? My mother then went and had a long conversation with this priest. So death, sickness, and rejection were not the only results of AIDS hitting our community. Darkness brought resilience. Soon, LGBTQ folks were organizing. ACT UP started in New York and spread throughout the country. Larry Kramer gave one of his most powerful speeches to an act-out crowd in New York by asking half the crowd to stand. He then said to those standing in his raspy New Yorkie voice, "You'll be dead in 6 months, what are you going to do about it?" The LGBT community became as bold as only those who have nothing to lose can be. I remember in 1989, 6 white professional gay men sneaking into the New York Stock Exchange before the first bell, climbing onto a balcony, chaining themselves to a rail and releasing a banner that decried the pharmaceutical company Burroughs Wellcome for gouging the price of AZT, which was the only drug that was somewhat effective and available, and setting off boat horns that delayed the start of the trading day on the most famous stock exchange in the world. Burroughs lowered their drug price in a few days after this action. The 6 fellows in their 30s never saw their 40s. I wish I had such boldness. Boldness. No gay man shall ever forget the role that lesbians play in this ordeal. The heroism of women was unparalleled. They bore the brunt of watching their brothers die over and over, and they rose to the occasion over and over. From walking picket lines to cleaning dirty bed linens to co-chairing ACT-UP meetings, our sisters stood by us. Let us not underestimate the contributions they made. They shine in this story as true selfless heroes, like a lit buoy on a dark sea. As drugs became more effective, and AIDS became to recede in public consciousness, our community was dramatically changed. We realized that we had to be strong, organized, and bold, because no one was going to do it for us. Sinn Féin, the Irish say, ourselves alone. I truly believe that the successes of the 2000s, with marriage equality, the end of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and other landmark achievements, were the direct result of the desperate effort and the maniacal ingenuity of those LGBT folks in the 80s and 90s fighting AIDS. As the new millennium started, I learned about a drug called PrEP by participating in 2 HIV trials at Brigham and Women's Hospital. And I started taking it daily. The game changed once more. For the first time, there was a preventative that was as or more effective than condoms. Yet even as PrEP is more widely accepted in the gay community, I still know fellows not taking PrEP who have seroconverted or become positive from AIDS, or become HIV positive. This is madness. Today, we are here to stop this madness. We will hear what happened during the 80s and the 90s in the South Coast from activists who are on the street, and we will mark their stories in historical archives, both here in the university and in our own private archives at the LGBT Network. We will listen to 2 nurse practitioners who are in the trenches, who will talk about current meds and trends. And then 2 local doctors will talk about the future progress and prognosis of AIDS, medical developments and trajectories. Finally, we will have an inclusive panel and work collectively to set goals for our specific region in the state. We have come a long way in 40 years. I am hopeful that with new medications, treatment, and awareness, we are progressing to the final ending of this disease. Perhaps, as Churchill might say if he were here, we are not at the beginning, nor are we at the end, but possibly we are at the beginning of the end. For all those who have gone before us, let us renew the effort to make this a reality starting today. And in that spirit of working towards the end of AIDS, I'd like to dedicate this conference to our colleague and LGBT Network board member, Lenny Amaral. Lenny passed away this summer, many of you know. He was a courageous fighter. He spent his life working to provide AIDS awareness and prevention in the South Coast. There were many nights I remember Lenny sitting at the bar, setting up his informational table at one of the stools. He would talk long into the night with whoever would listen. He was a good man, and he is missed by his family and his LGBT colleagues. I spoke to his mother, told her what was happening today. She's thrilled. And on behalf of that, I'd like to thank Lenny and thank you all